I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're stepping into the shadowy world of Far Eastern intrigue with an amazing author. His name is Roger Crossland, and he has penned a wonderful book. It is called The Abalone Ukulele, A Tale of Far Eastern Intrigue. This gripping historical novel weaves together espionage, naval intrigue, and cultural clashes in 1913 Shanghai as three ordinary men and women confront extraordinary stakes involving gold, revolution, and survival. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Bookside Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below the interview. Roger, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Glad to be here. It's a privilege.
Privilege to have you on the show, my friend. This is such an imaginative story. 1913 Shanghai as a backdrop. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I initially started with the idea. I'm a retired SEAL with 35 years
Mhm.
service, active and reserve. And I'd always enjoyed history, and I've always enjoyed uh, special operations. And I thought it might be interesting to combine the two. I'm also a fan of fighting sail series, but I didn't think it was my cup of tea that I wanted something I that hadn't been plowed quite as often. I also realized that if I got into the turn of the century, and primarily in the period before World War One, it'd have a lot of dynamics to it. The not gilded period, the roaring 90s, things are happening all over the world at a very hectic and interesting pace. I also, as a historian, realized that I could find more information, that there are photos around to use for inspiration, and the deck plate sailor is keeping diaries. So you can
Mhm.
get their diaries and use them as sources for inspiration.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, I also spent a lot of time in Asia.
Yeah.
I had about 9 trips to Korea. I served at my first uh, deployment was to Vietnam, second was to Korea, third to the Philippines, and my final deployment was to Afghanistan.
Mm.
So these, I had it by osmosis, picked up inspiration. But I found these cultures very interesting, and and they just do things and think differently, and that makes it all very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives the reader an opportunity to explore Asian culture, China, Korea, Japan, and of course the United States as well. And I think it's part of the fun of reading a novel is that you're transported to different lands and transported to different times. Now, imagining Shanghai in 1913, did you do research? Tell us how you went about painting that world, that part of the book.
Well, I every time I've written a book, it costs me about reading probably 3 books for every 10 pages of print.
Oh.
And so I immerse myself, and I don't just stick to naval history. My degree from Columbia is in sociology history,
Mhm.
and it's a different way of looking at history. You're looking at the institutions that anchor a culture and
Mhm.
how it's done all sorts of different ways. Their form of government, their moral, reinforcing their moral values and other values are all done with different kinds of institutions. And not everybody realizes that. They uh, can't understand why there isn't a McDonald's on the corner of every foreign nation corner.
Exactly.
There are other ways of approaching problems, and some of them are very enlightened, and some of them are counterproductive. But
Mm.
they are all interesting studies, and you suddenly realize there's more than one way to skin a cat, that there are
Yeah.
different ways of ruling and organizing a country. And also, they have their problems. And in Shanghai at that time, it was the Wild West,
Yeah,
but it was very interesting.
absolutely. Part of the plot involves Japanese gold ingots. Tell us about that part of the story.
Okay, well, I'm a SEAL and a senior officer SEAL, and special operations are conducted in a lot of different fields, and one of them is economic warfare. You, not all battles are fought with bullets and grenades. You can, uh, Clausewitz said, the way you win a war is just by convincing the other side they don't have the will to fight anymore. Well,
Mm.
if everybody's bank account is empty and they can't feed themselves, they start thinking differently about being aggressive or by or actually just innocently in a plight, but they
Mm.
can't fight. So that, and in Vietnam, are some of our best operations were done against uh, tax collectors,
Right.
Viet Cong tax collectors. It was a shadow government, and there were men, and I had Vietnamese defectors who'd come over to our side and had stories about how their family members had been addressed by these tax collectors, and they could protest, and it was extortion. It might, if you protested, you might end up dead.
Right.
So economic warfare and counter-economic warfare are something I was very much involved in.
Yeah. The Obviously being a SEAL has shaped your worldview. It's probably different than civilians because you've seen the necessity of war and the necessity of combat at times. It also shapes this novel as well. Tell us how your work as a SEAL, your career as a SEAL, has impacted the work.
Well, I part of being a good SEAL, especially in a lot of operations, is getting to know the people around you and understanding how things are different and how people go about approaching things. Now, uh, I had in the States, if you want an animal to sound the alarm if you're being approached, you have a dog. In
Right.
Vietnam, you have geese.
Huh.
The geese are the alarms, and that goes back to Roman times. They had geese too
Hmm.
as alarms. Uh, and you, and a lot of my work was gathering intelligence about where we were going to stage a raid. And I had to understand different things. In Asia, if somebody's smiling at you, it doesn't necessarily mean they're happy. It may mean they're nervous.
Right.
And you got to put them at ease, and you've got
Mhm.
to uh, understand their value system. And to get information out in the best way, the more you know about their culture and uh, how they value things, the intersection of family and dreams are important for you to understand. They're in other military units. Saw people uh, being questioned, and they were a loss to know how to uh, get into somebody who's volunteering information's uh, understanding. So and I also have another perspective is my father and mother met in Casablanca during World War II. My
Wow.
fa my father was a Army Air Force officer, and my mother was a French, Moroccan-born French Croix Français nurse. Uh, and I can remember how she used to talk about the day they were liberated.
Sure. That's an amazing story. That could be a book in and of itself. What a beautiful story that your father was an American soldier in Casablanca and your mother was a French nurse. I mean, I think
Well,
it's
they'd have to compete with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman.
exactly. I was going to say, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walked into mine. Yeah. That's how the book could start for you, and well, and say, well, it didn't quite start like this, but this is what happened. I think that's a beautiful story. That's amazing.
Well, I'm going to write that down. Okay, I
Sounds good. Feel free to borrow it. No, not a problem. Have you envisioned, speaking of Casablanca and great movies, have you envisioned this book as a movie?
yes, yes. I've uh, very often, but it would be difficult. I
Yeah.
definitely wouldn't want to be with a movie crew in mainland China
Yeah.
right now. And
Yeah.
I am also a lawyer and was that was my reserve time. I lived sort of a double life,
Mm.
and I've got some horror stories to tell about doing business with Russian and Chinese
Yeah.
in Russia and giant China that they you can never make them pure capitalists.
Right.
There's the government and the secret agencies that can push your corporation and your manufacturing around. Uh, so yeah, there are a bunch of vantage points I look at things from.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, both the lawyer side and the SEAL side are adversarial.
Mm.
We're always thinking about the fight and
Right.
who is doing us wrong and who is doing us right.
Right. And they kind of both have two different strategies. The lawyer is more of a rational, reasonable, logical side, and the SEAL is more of a rip their throat out side, in a way, right? It's more physical.
Well, as a lawyer, I've rarely seen the rational side. Uh, but
That's true. Talk to anybody who's been around a lawyer long enough, and they'll tell you that lawyers aren't completely rational. That's for sure. Well, at least they're supposed to be in theory, but everything in theory is supposed to work, right?
but both professions are high stakes.
Yeah.
It's you can be put away, you can lose your liberty, or you can lose your life.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, you're a
so
true Renaissance man, a Navy SEAL, an attorney, and an author. That's amazing. Yeah. And we were talking about this as a movie. I think it'd be a spectacular movie. What would be your favorite scene? What scene would you love to see recreated the most?
holy cow! Without spoiling, well, there is a scene where the chief protagonist gets a small bit of retribution out of his the Spuyten family, which is evil as evil can be,
Mhm.
and it's pretty dramatic and borders on brutal, but
Right.
not as brutal as the Spuytens. And then there's the climax, or the second to last climax. I double climax, uh, where they're storming a ship to free some women. The crew of the Pluto wants to free their girlfriends, and they're held captive on a Spuyten ship. And Those are is a historical fiction writer, Umberto Eco, and he says you should always start with a seminal image. And those two images were the ones I thought of. And I think a seminal image means, your trailer,
Yeah.
what will put them in the seats in the theater. And those two scenes are are perhaps the most dramatic. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. I think they'd be spectacular on the big screen or the small screen. Either way, I think they would be great because the small screens aren't that small today. So it's on TV would work as well. Let me ask you about this book. Is it part of a series?
yes, yes, it's the second book, and I'm working on a third.
Okay.
And yes, it's part of a series. Now, how many books is it remains to be seen. And it seems with all the research I do, it takes me about a couple of years to
Sure.
finish a book.
Yeah. Tell us about the first book in
The
the series.
first book is Jade Rooster,
Hmm.
where uh, the Hobson, he's a quartermaster petty officer in the U.S. Navy, uh, meets a naval intelligence officer, and they've got to find out what has happened to a merchant ship. Now, the Navy doesn't normally do things like that, but some senators pulling the Navy's chain and saying the owners of this ship are good supporters, and this ship is in your area in Asia, and it's somewhere in Asia, and it's been lost.
Mm.
So they take that and investigate it, and it's intelligence work. Ends up being that, and Hobson is a the son of missionaries, American missionaries that practiced both in Japan and Korea. So he speaks both languages. Uh, the the naval militia officer is a professor who is a linguist, and he's picking up on Japanese very quickly. And he's a clever guy and
Hmm.
sort of interesting. Um, and they end up turning up some skullduggery by two other countries that are costing people's lives and stirring up trouble in both Korea and the Philippines. Uh,
Sounds intriguing for sure. Where will the third book take us?
the third book is going to take place in it's World War One,
Mm.
1914. Now, a lot of countries have been brought into the war almost immediately,
Hmm.
but U.S. isn't going to get drawn into the war for another 3 years. However, the U.S. has interests, and the U.S. Navy has interests, and so uh, in the intelligence office, the naval militia officer has some ideas that will uh, benefit the United States Navy without getting it brought into anything uh, too early. So that's as much as I got.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds
It
very intriguing as well. It's a perfect complement to the other two books, and I'm sure more will come as you develop it more, research it more, write it more. Why is the book we're focusing on today the Abalone Ukulele? Why is it called the Abalone Ukulele?
Okay. The intersection of Hobson and Skookum Yee. Skookum Yee is the courier, and Hobson is the quartermaster petty officer. Is Hobson sees a ukulele in a pawn shop window, and he keeps watching it, and he's waiting for the time to run out on the ticket. it's been hawked by some German sailor. And Hobson wants that ukulele, and it's inlaid with abalone. And at that pawn shop, several of the characters intersect in different ways, but that is the key to the everything coming together. That here you've got a Korean tribute who's been disgraced, and you've got a deck plate sailor, uh, and how were they going to get some help from the Asiatic station? Uh, and it all pivots on sort of a minor matter, where Hobson shows some skill, and the next thing you know, Skookum Yi is asking for an audience with the admiral of the Asiatic station, and he wants to point out this gold is going to cause problems, and maybe it can be used to solve some problems.
Mm.
Uh,
Very, very interesting indeed. Let's talk a little bit about the theme of unconventional warfare in the book.
well, as I said, this a heist is a raid, and there are two raids, one by the Japanese and one by the U.S. Navy sub Rosa. Uh, Unconventional warfare is, broadly talking, everything that isn't unconventional, or unconventional warfare is anything that isn't conventional warfare.
Right.
So, and it often involves small groups hitting pinpoint targets in unexpected places.
Mm.
Unconventional warfare can be very efficient. It also can be used to tie up the enemy. But in this particular situation, it's a heist, and it's done with diversions. It's done without the victim, if we can call
Yeah.
the Japanese at that time victims,
Yeah.
without them even having a clue as where the money went to. And
Right.
of course, there are triads. Uh, Shanghai is brimming over with triads.
Hmm.
And so there are a lot of distractions, but they want their money back.
Yeah.
One of the problems is the the raid is a success, but that's just the beginning of things. You've got to, where do you put the money? The ingots. Where do you put the ingots? What do you do with the ingots? How do you protect the ingots? And that is often the part that people don't realize in special operations. It's not just doing some of the things, it's figuring out how to handle what happens, the repercussions.
Yeah.
And they can be very personal.
Absolutely. Do you see any parallels between the geopolitical dynamics of 1913 and today?
Yes, yes, very much so. Uh, in uh, in that time, Japan is the villain, and they use kind of Sun Tzu. I'm not know. I don't know if you're familiar with
Sure.
him.
The
He
Art
was
of
a
War.
Chinese general. Had very he was way ahead of, and I'm trying to remember the Italian who was also known for dirty tricks. But
Hmm.
Sun Tzu was big on dirty tricks.
Right.
And so at this time, the dirty tricks are done by the Japanese. Today, we've got to be very suspicious of the Chinese communists.
Mm.
They tell us one story and it isn't true, and it's much of it is aimed at undermining our economy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just
It's,
the reverse. In my book, China is the victim. In contemporary days, China's can be the government. China's government can be the villain. The Chinese people are
yeah.
salt of the earth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the government is not. The government can be the bane of the earth, and some might even blame the pandemic on the government. But that's for another topic, another discussion, I'd
Yeah,
guess.
that could take another 3 hours, minimum,
Exactly.
minimum.
Exactly. Tell us a little bit about your literary influences and how they've shaped your work.
Well, growing up, there's an author, Kenneth Roberts, who's
Hmm.
a uh, historical fiction writer who ended up getting a special Pulitzer Prize.
Hmm.
There's James Clavell, who has not, well, one of my reviewers said I echoed a little bit of James Clavell.
Wonderful.
And C.S. Forrester and Patrick O'Brien. Patrick O'Brien is mid-mention in a couple of my reviews. But I liked reading history. I live in a town that was burned during the American Revolution.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think uh, history is very important. Probably is brought about by my coming from two different cultures.
Hmm.
My mother would every now and say, "The Americans do this," or "I wonder why the Americans do that."
Right.
And so I got used to looking at things with a little detachment and thinking, I wonder how that first came about.
Yeah.
Why do people do this or why do people do that?
Hmm.
And so it's all very interesting for me. My wife's Canadian. My
Hmm.
grandmother was Scottish, and she was a McLennan Logan. Uh,
Really? Okay. Well, Logans are a big Scottish name and a big Scottish clan, and so are the Crawfords, as a matter of fact. So I was going to say to you, if you love history, you live in the right state. I don't think there's a slice of America where you can find preserved revolutionary and colonial America still intact like there is in Connecticut. It's amazing.
uh, I Yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah.
In, in a way, they could enjoy the benefits of Boston and New York, yeah, but they were far enough away to not suffer the downside.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Take a stroll through Essex, Connecticut, and you'll feel like you're back in George Washington's time. In
Oh
fact, you
yes,
can
yes,
drink
and
at the same
Stonington
pub.
too.
Yeah, without a doubt. The name of the book we've been focusing on today, like a laser beam, is The Abalone Ukulele, a tale of Far Eastern intrigue. This is a gripping historical novel that weaves together espionage, naval intrigue, and cultural clashes in 1913 Shanghai as three ordinary men and women confront extraordinary stakes involving gold, revolution, and survival. It is written by a real life hero, a real life Renaissance man, a man who is a soldier, a SEAL, and an attorney, and a wonderful, prolific author as well. This book is part of a series, and a third installment will be coming out in the not too distant future. Roger, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
It's been great.
I'm glad you had a good time. I enjoyed speaking with you as well, sir. Thank you for your service. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.